Welcome back to Vaulted World Secrets, and if this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found us. Thank you for spending your time here tonight. Before we begin, if you were given the chance to enter the Great Pyramid of Giza alone, at night, with no lights, would you go in? And if you've ever felt something unexplainable near an ancient place, tell us what happened. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's begin. There is a room inside the Great Pyramid of Giza that no living human being has ever entered. It was detected in the year 2017, not by excavation, not by a shovel pressed against 4,000-year-old limestone, but by particles. Cosmic particles, muons, the same subatomic fragments produced when radiation from deep space collides with the Earth's atmosphere pass through the pyramid, the way light passes through fog. And on the other side, the sensors registered an anomaly, a space, a void, sitting directly above the Grand Gallery, one of the most studied architectural corridors in human history, stretching inward toward the heart of the structure. Its length estimated at no fewer than 30 meters. No one has gone in, no one has tried. The void simply sits there. Above, a passage that has been walked by tourists and archaeologists and thieves and treasure hunters for over 3,000 years, and no one knew it existed. That is where this begins. Not with the void itself, but with what that silence implies. That the pyramid, the structure humanity has scrutinized most obsessively across all of recorded history, still holds something back. That after every scan, every measurement, every argument over purpose and engineering and alignment, the stone simply waited and said nothing. The Pyramid of Khufu was constructed during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, in a period historians date to approximately 2560 BC. It rose from the Giza Plateau on the west bank of the Nile, south of what would eventually become the city of Memphis, on a shelf of bedrock deliberately selected for its elevation, its geological stability, and its orientation to the cardinal points of the compass. It stands today at approximately 138 meters, a reduction from its original height of 146 meters. The outer casing stones, of brilliant white Tura limestone, having been stripped away during the medieval period to build mosques and fortifications in Cairo. What remains is the core. The naked interior geometry of a structure, assembled from an estimated 2.3 million individual stone blocks, the heaviest of which approach 80 metric tons, and were sourced from quarries at Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers to the south. The logistics of that transportation, barges on the Nile, sledges, lubricated ramps, tens of thousands of skilled workers organized into rotating crews with documented wages and medical care, have been reconstructed from papyrus records discovered as recently as 2013. These documents, found at the ancient port of Wadi el-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, contain the administrative diary of an official named Merer, who supervised the delivery of limestone from the Tura quarries to the Giza Plateau. His account is meticulous delivery schedules, material quantities, crew rotations, the names of supervisors, the rhythm of a working life spent moving the material that would become the most enduring structure on Earth. It is the oldest papyrus ever discovered in Egypt. It says nothing about what was hidden inside. The Old Kingdom, the period spanning roughly 2686 BC to 2181 BC, was the age in which Egypt first achieved the architectural expression of the divine. Before it, burial monuments had been mastabas, flat-roofed rectangular structures of mud brick, stepped pyramids of modest scale, experimental forms that collapsed or were abandoned mid-construction. The pyramid at Meidum, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu's father, shows clear evidence of structural failure. Its outer casing fell, and what remains is a tower of core masonry surrounded by a mountain of its own debris. Sneferu also built the bent pyramid at Dashur, whose angle shifts dramatically partway up its sides, a visible record of engineers adjusting in real time. The slope steepened and then abruptly corrected when the structure showed signs of sinking under its own weight, the bent pyramid still stands, still visibly bent. A monument in stone to a problem identified and solved before the next attempt. These were not failures of ambition, they were the experiments that made Khufu's pyramid possible. By the time construction at Giza began, the architects and engineers of the Fourth Dynasty had accumulated decades of empirical knowledge of limestone behavior under compression, of the relationship between angle and stability, of how water moves through the plateau's substrate and what that means for the bedrock beneath. They knew what they were doing in a way that no people before them had known, and yet the pyramid still holds rooms no one has found. It holds the void above the grand gallery. It holds the original function of the Queen's Chamber, whose corbelled walls and niche of unknown purpose have never been conclusively explained, the name itself, a medieval Arabic invention with no historical basis, applied by early explorers whose interpretive framework was their own and not the builders'. It holds the sealed shafts, commonly called air shafts, though they do not function as air shafts and were never intended to that extend from the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber toward the exterior of the structure, pointing precisely at stars that held ritual significance in the religious cosmology of the Fourth Dynasty. Thuban, the pole star of the Old Kingdom, visible through the northern shaft from the King's Chamber. The three stars of Orion's belt, the constellation the ancient Egyptians identified with Osiris, Lord of the Dead and Lord of the Duat, aligned with the southern shaft. These alignments were not coincidental. They were not decorative. They were functional in the same sense that the portcullis blocks in the antechamber were functional. Elements of a system designed to perform specific operations that extended beyond the physical, and it holds the subterranean chamber beneath the pyramid, cut directly into the bedrock at a depth of approximately 30 meters below the plateau's surface, unfinished, its ceiling roughly hewn, and its floor littered with what appears to be ancient debris, limestone chips, the accumulated residue of work that stopped. Archaeological consensus has proposed that this chamber may have been abandoned in favor of the higher burial chambers when the architectural plan changed during construction. But abandoned construction sudden, complete, mid-task, tends to leave a specific kind of evidence, the incomplete cut lines still visible in the ceiling rock. The feeling, still described by archaeologists who enter the space today, that work stopped not gradually but instantly, as if the people inside simply stood, set down what they were holding, walked out, and did not come back. There is no record of why. There is only the unfinished room, sitting in the dark beneath the pyramid, with the marks of the last day's work still legible in the stone after 4,500 years. The men who built this are anonymous to history, not because they were slaves. The papyrus records and the medical reports and the housing foundations discovered near the plateau, all indicating a paid, housed, fed, and medically supported workforce. But because the culture of the Old Kingdom did not record the names of those who built, it recorded the names of those for whom things were built. Khufu, his vizier Hemiunu, whose over-life-size statue survives in a museum in Hildesheim, his proportions suggesting a man of considerable physical weight and administrative authority, the overseers, the administrators, the Sem priests who performed the rituals that activated the pyramid's function at its completion. The workers are stone. Their labor is still present in every joint and course of the structure, but their names are gone. The stone remembers nothing of who placed it, and the stone does not give up what it has been asked to hold. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber is wider than the entrance passage. It could not have been carried in after the chamber was complete. It was placed during construction and closed within the rising walls, built into the pyramid before the pyramid closed around it, a permanent fixture designed into the room from the beginning. And when it was found, first documented by Arab historians in the 9th century AD, when the Caliph al-Mamun forced a passage through the limestone and worked his way through the descending and ascending passages to the king's chamber, it was empty. The lid was missing. The chamber smelled of dust and age and nothing else. No body, no artifacts, no inscription on any wall. The tomb of the man who directed the largest construction project in human history contains nothing but a broken, lidless box of red Aswan granite. The king's chamber itself, approximately 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 6 meters high, is lined throughout with polished red Aswan granite. The seams between the blocks cut so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot be passed between them. The ceiling is composed of 9 great granite slabs, each weighing approximately 45 metric tons, arranged in a single flat layer. Above them, 5 further chambers are stacked in succession, the so-called relieving chambers, each designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid's mass outward and away from the burial space below. The system works. It has worked for 4,500 years. Not one block in the ceiling of the king's chamber has shifted. When the chamber is empty of visitors, the only sound is a low resonance. A hum, consistent, emanating from the stone itself, produced by the natural compression of granite under the weight of the pyramid above it. This is not reported as anomaly, it is reported as baseline. The chamber hums and has hummed since the final block was placed. Visitors report the hum and report, in addition to it, a feeling of being watched, a directional pressure, a sudden and overwhelming desire to leave and not return. Workers and guards who spend extended time inside the structure, the men who clean the passages, monitor access, maintain the ventilation systems, describe not fear exactly, but attentiveness. The sense that the structure notices who enters and for what reason. That the distinction the ancient Egyptians drew between those who came to serve the dead and those who came to take from them is in some manner that defies easy articulation, still present in the stone, still oriented, still functioning. The pyramid texts, the collection of religious spells and navigational instructions inscribed on the walls of the 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids at Saqqara, beginning with the Pyramid of Unas around 2375 BC, some of the oldest religious writing ever found, describe in considerable detail what the interior of a pyramid is for. It is a transitional space, a threshold. The body of the pharaoh is placed within it, not to remain permanently, but to begin a journey, and the pyramid's architecture is designed to support and mirror every stage of that journey. The descending passage leads down into the earth, into the first darkness. The ascending passage reverses direction, climbing toward the heart of the structure. The grand gallery rises dramatically for nearly 47 meters, its corbelled walls narrowing overhead in 7 successive courses, until the ceiling is barely wider than a single person. The geometry pressing upward, with a quality of culmination, of approach. Then the antechamber, with its granite portcullis blocks, designed to seal the passage after the last priest departed. Then the king's chamber, the box of red granite, the alignment with Thuban and Orion, the place where the journey of transformation was intended to begin. If that theology is taken seriously, and it was taken seriously by its designers, who embedded it in the most precisely engineered structure ever built, then the void above the grand gallery sits at the most consequential point in the entire sequence. Directly above the passage that represents the soul's ascent, at the threshold between the journey's middle passage and its culmination, 30 meters of sealed space. At the exact point where the theology requires something to happen, what sits in that space is unknown. The instruments detect it. The stone says nothing. The association between ancient Egyptian burial goods and misfortune for those who disturb them is not a modern invention. It is not a product of 1920s tabloid journalism or 20th century occultism. It is older than either of those things by thousands of years. The concept of a protective inscription in Egyptian religious practice was not metaphorical. It was functional, addressed to specific categories of transgressor, describing specific consequences, invoking specific divine entities whose role in the theological system was explicitly punitive. The ancient Egyptians believed, with the same seriousness with which they believed in the alignment of the pyramid's shafts with specific stars, that an object removed from its burial context carried with it a quality of disturbance that would not resolve until the object was returned. The system from which it was taken would continue to register its absence, and the person who carried it would carry that registration with them. One inscription from a Saqqara mastaba, translated from Middle Egyptian and dated to approximately 2300 BC, warns in explicit language that any individual who enters the tomb with malicious intent will be seized simultaneously by a crocodile, a snake, and a lion. The language is not theatrical. It is the language of a legal instrument, specific, precise, addressed to a future reader whose identity is unknown, but whose potential action is clearly anticipated. The architects of the Old Kingdom understood deterrence with the same rigor they applied to every other problem they solved. The deterrence did not work. Ancient Egypt's tombs were robbed almost as soon as they were sealed. The evidence is consistent across every dynasty, every site, every period. The Valley of the Kings, constructed during the New Kingdom, precisely because the monumental visibility of the Giza pyramids had made them indefensible, was itself systematically looted, in many cases within years of sealing. Papyrus records from the reign of Ramesses IX, dating to approximately 1100 BC, document official investigations into tomb robberies at Thebes. The records are detailed: names of the accused, descriptions of their methods, itemized lists of objects removed. Some were caught and executed. Some were never identified. Their names survive in the prosecution records. The objects they took do not. The most documented modern case remains the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in November of 1922. The expedition's primary financier, Lord Carnarvon, died the following April. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected. The infection traveled to his bloodstream, his condition deteriorating rapidly, at a hotel in Cairo before his death at the age of 57. Reports from the time, widely circulated and impossible to verify, stated that all the lights in Cairo went out at the moment of his death. His son reported that their dog in England howled and died in the same hour. Arthur Mace, who assisted in opening the inner chambers, died in 1928. The cause eventually identified as arsenic poisoning from compounds used in artifact conservation, a detail that emerged slowly and much later. George J. Gould, who visited the tomb in 1923, died the following year. The radiologist Archibald Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died in 1924. Aubrey Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, died in 1923. Howard Carter himself, the man who first entered the burial chamber, who first looked upon the gilded face of the innermost coffin, lived until 1939, dying of Hodgkin's lymphoma at 64. His grave in Putney Vale Cemetery in London carries an inscription drawn from an ancient Egyptian offering formula. A man who spent his working life inside the tombs of the dead chose, for his own epitaph, the language of the culture he had spent his life studying. A study published in the British Medical Journal in 2002 analyzed the mortality of those present at the tomb's opening and found no statistically significant difference from a comparable control population. The mold theory ancient fungal or bacterial cultures sealed in the tomb for 3,000 years and released upon opening has been raised and neither confirmed nor fully dismissed. What the statistical study cannot account for is the texture of the individual cases, the convergence of timing, the specific nature of some of the illnesses, the recurring proximity between contact with removed material and subsequent decline. Statistics deal in populations. These accounts come from individuals. The two frameworks are not designed to reach the same conclusions. Outside the documented cases, in the harder-to-reach corners of the trade in Egyptian antiquities and accounts that surface without the protection of institutional affiliation or academic publication, the pattern is more consistent and more specific. Ahushabti, one of the small faience servant figures placed in burial chambers to labor in the afterlife on behalf of the deceased, was acquired by a private collector in Belgium in the 1980s. Within months of its installation in the collector's home, 3 members of his family died. He sold the object. The next owner experienced a fire that destroyed a substantial portion of his property. The object passed through 4 documented owners in 7 years, each transition marked by a different category of loss: health, property, financial security, a marriage. A researcher in Paris eventually traced the chain and documented it in a privately circulated letter to a small group of scholars with shared interest in the question. The letter is not widely available. The story is not widely known. It is not unique. The pattern surfaces across the 20th century in accounts attached to scarabs, canopic jar fragments, strips of painted coffin cartonnage, shabtis of every material, amulets of faience, and gold and carnelian. Every category of object whose original function was defined by the burial context from which it was removed, these objects were not decorative. They were not manufactured to sit behind glass in a London drawing room or in the climate-controlled storage of a private dealer. They were made with extraordinary precision and in accordance with a theology of extraordinary internal consistency to perform a specific function inside a sealed space in relation to a specific body across an indefinite expanse of time. The system was designed to run without end. Removing a component from a system designed to run without end does not stop the system. It introduces a disturbance that the system continues to register at whatever level systems register such things for as long as the component remains displaced. That is the internal logic of the curse. Not supernatural in the Hollywood sense, not the green mist or the collapsing temple or the dramatic immediate retribution of popular storytelling. Something quieter, something patient. A calibration error in a mechanism built to last 4,000 years. The error propagates. The person holding the displaced component carries the propagation with them. The stone waits. The Egyptian government's active repatriation program for stolen antiquities operates within this understanding, whether or not its officials frame it in those terms. The argument is made on the grounds of cultural heritage and national sovereignty, and those grounds are fully legitimate on their own. But the pattern, the silence that tends to follow objects returned to their country of origin, as distinct from the noise that surrounded them while displaced, is a data point that does not appear in formal documentation and is not entirely dismissible. Leave it where it is. That was the instruction, inscribed in stone, addressed to whoever would eventually arrive. Not everyone listened. The record of what followed those who did not is, at minimum, a remarkable convergence of misfortune, spanning continents and centuries, and individuals with no connection to one another except the displaced object in their possession. In 2023, a hidden corridor was announced, a 9-meter passage just below the north face of the Great Pyramid, positioned above the main entrance, detected through the same muon tomography that found the void. It is the first new structural element discovered inside the pyramid in the modern era. Archaeologists using small cameras and endoscopic instruments found the interior walls of smooth, prepared white limestone. The preparation of those walls matters. An unprepared space is a structural necessity, a void created to relieve weight or accommodate an engineering element. A prepared space is an intention. Someone decided this space should have finished walls. Someone spent time finishing them. Someone cared about the quality of this space's interior surface with the same care they applied to every other surface in the structure that was intended to perform a function. What function? No one yet knows. The access protocols for exploring what lies beyond the corridor are still being developed. The archaeologists involved speak with the precision of people who have learned from experience that the pyramid corrects confident assumptions. They describe what the instruments show. They decline to theorize beyond the evidence. They work slowly. They are in no hurry. They are working on a structure that has been waiting for 4,500 years. It will wait a little longer. There are elements of the pyramid's strange modern life that are not rooted in history but in fabrication, and the distinction matters. The story of the photograph, the one that circulates in online spaces, claiming that in the year 1923, an expedition photograph taken inside one of the pyramid chambers showed an unidentified figure dressed in clothing inconsistent with the period, and that the photograph was subsequently suppressed, is a fabrication, not a misinterpretation, not an ambiguous image subject to legitimate dispute. There is no photograph. There is no suppressed negative. There is no record in the British Museum's Egyptian archives of any such image or any decision to withhold one. The story has no provenance. Its earliest traceable appearance is in internet forums of the early 2000s. It circulates because the real history makes it feel possible. The void above the Grand Gallery is real. The deaths following the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb are real. The inscribed curses are real. The pattern around removed artifacts is real enough to produce consistent testimony across decades and continents. When the documented strangeness is this vivid, the imagination fills any remaining space with images that match its texture. The fabricated photograph is a product of the pyramid's genuine power, not evidence of anything within it. The stories attached to the underground maintenance tunnels of the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas belong to a similar category, though a less interesting one. The Luxor Hotel, built in the early 1990s in the form of a pyramid as an architectural reference to Egyptian monumentalism, has accumulated over 3 decades a collection of accounts from workers in its lower utility levels: sounds without source, disorientation, a persistent reluctance among certain staff to work in specific areas. The stories are vivid and multiply with retelling. They are not the stories of the pyramids. They are the stories of an uncomfortable institutional basement. A modern building built from steel and concrete and glass in a Nevada desert, whose granite is decorative and whose corridors encode nothing. If workers experience unease in those tunnels, the causes are the ordinary causes of unease in any subgrade maintenance space: low ceilings, the absence of natural light, the acoustic flatness of poured concrete, the psychological weight of working beneath millions of tons of structure. These are real effects with known mechanisms and no connection to ancient Egypt. What they reveal is the reach of the pyramid's cultural gravity. A building that resembles a pyramid only in its external silhouette generates accounts that reach immediately for the frame of ancient curse and pharaonic anger. The mind has been shaped by the actual pyramids, their age, their scale, their inexplicable qualities, the theological system that produced them into a pattern of association so strong that any rhyming detail is pulled into its orbit without being asked. That is the true measure of what was built on the Giza Plateau. Not just the engineering, not just the theology, the duration and intensity of the psychological hold it maintains on the species that built it across every culture and every century that has encountered it since. A hold powerful enough that its echoes are mistaken for the thing itself, in a hotel in Nevada, in a fabricated photograph in an internet forum. In every successive generation's attempt to find new language for what the structure produces in the people who stand before it, the Giza Plateau, in the early morning, before the day's heat settles onto the stone, is a place of extraordinary sensory clarity. The limestone is pale under the low light. The shadows from the pyramid's edges are long and precise, falling across the debris field at the base with a geometric accuracy that makes the boundary between structure and ground look deliberate, which it is. The air at this hour is still, no wind. The sound is the soft percussion of dust settling on warm stone. The temperature in the shade of the pyramid's north face is measurably cooler than the surrounding desert, the mass of the structure holding the cool of night longer than the open ground does. Inside, the temperature is constant, 20 degrees Celsius, always, in winter and in summer, in the cold of a desert night and the brutal heat of a July afternoon. The limestone regulates it with a precision that no modern building achieves passively, a thermal equilibrium maintained continuously for 4,500 years without intervention. The effect inside the king's chamber, the polished walls, the low resonant hum, the constant temperature, the empty sarcophagus to the west, is of a space that exists outside the ordinary conditions of time. Not warm, not cold, not day, not night. Just the constant 20 degrees and the granite and the darkness and the sarcophagus waiting, as it has always been waiting, for something that has not come. The pyramid was designed to function forever. Its geometry was calibrated to the stars, to the cardinal directions, to the proportions of the earth. The shafts ascending from the king's chamber toward the northern and southern sky were pointed at Thuban and at the three stars of Orion's belt, not as decoration, but as instruments. The system was built for eternity. What its designers could not have anticipated was a world in which the gods for whom the system was designed would cease to receive worship, in which the priests who performed the maintenance rituals would be gone, in which the culture that understood the pyramid's purpose would be replaced by cultures that did not. The system was built for eternity and found itself, within a few thousand years, orphaned. Its mechanism still intact, the stones standing, the shafts still aligned, the hum still resonating, but its operators gone. That is the quality that settles over the plateau before the day's visitors arrive. The feeling not of something dead, but of something that has been running without tending for a very long time. Something that does not know how to stop, because it was never designed to. The void above the Grand Gallery is still there. The new corridor below the north face is open to instrumentation and not yet to human entry. The subterranean chamber is still rough and unfinished. The granite sarcophagus is still empty, and somewhere in the space between what is documented and what the stone continues to withhold, the pattern that the ancient Egyptians inscribed on their tomb walls, the pattern of consequence for those who take what was placed there, continues to produce results that the people experiencing them describe consistently as something they cannot explain away. The pyramid holds what it was given. It has always held what it was given. The empty sarcophagus holds the absence of what should have been there. The void above the Grand Gallery holds whatever it holds. The unfinished chamber holds the memory of work stopped suddenly. The new corridor holds prepared walls and an undiscovered interior and the careful, deliberate approach of the people whose job it is to find out what comes next. And the plateau holds everything else: the heat, the dust, the long shadows of early morning, the hum in the granite, the constant 20 degrees. The shafts still pointing at the stars having shifted over 4,500 years of the Earth's axial precession, but the shafts still aimed where they were aimed, still measuring the distance between where the sky was and where the sky is, still functioning as instruments of a calculation that was set running before every major civilization currently on Earth came into existence. The stone knows what it holds. It has known for 4,500 years. And it has not told anyone yet. There is something worth dwelling on in the way the pyramid was built, not the logistics of it, which have been studied and argued over for centuries, but the attitude embedded in the construction itself, the attitude toward permanence. The ancient Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were not building for the span of a dynasty or even a civilization. They were building for the concept of always. The choice of granite for the king's chamber and the sarcophagus granite shipped from Aswan at extraordinary cost and difficulty, when the surrounding plateau is composed of perfectly serviceable limestone, was a choice about duration. Limestone weathers. Given sufficient time and moisture, limestone dissolves, crumbles, loses its edges. Granite does not in any time frame a human civilization can meaningfully plan against. The choice of granite for the chamber that mattered most was a statement about how long that chamber was expected to remain intact. Not centuries, not millennia, but something approaching forever. That attitude toward permanence is visible in every decision the Fourth Dynasty architects made. The 9 ceiling slabs of the king's chamber, 45 metric tons each, positioned with tolerances that would challenge modern construction equipment, were not the minimum required to support the structure above. They were over-engineered in a specific and intentional way, with the 5 stacking relieving chambers above them, distributing the load in a redundant system that would continue functioning even if one of the relieving chambers were to collapse. It is engineering designed to survive every failure mode its designers could anticipate, and several they could not. The structure has now survived 4,500 years of seismic activity, temperature fluctuation, the stripping of its outer casing, and the intrusion of millions of visitors. The 9 ceiling slabs have not shifted. The system functions. The forever that was designed into it is, so far, holding. This is the context in which the warnings inscribed in the 5th Dynasty tombs at Saqqara must be understood. The pyramid texts Nearly 800 individual spells, incantations, and instructions carved into the limestone walls of the burial chambers of Unas, Teti, Pepi I, and their successors were not afterthoughts. They were the culmination of a theological tradition that had been developing since the earliest periods of Egyptian history, committed to stone for the first time in the 5th dynasty, with the same attitude toward permanence that governed the construction of the pyramids themselves. These texts were not meant to last for a generation or a century. They were meant to last for the same forever that the granite was meant to last. They were meant to be read by the soul navigating the Duat, by any living person who entered the chamber, by whoever came after the civilization that built them had itself become dust. The warnings to those who would disturb the burial were part of the same document. The instruction and the threat were written in the same hand, with the same instrument, on the same walls, as permanent as everything else in the structure. They were not decoration. They were a legal instrument in a legal tradition that understood itself to extend into the afterlife. The gods who administered consequence for theft from the dead, the same gods who weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of Mot in the Hall of Two Truths, were understood to be as real and as present and as administratively competent as the vizier who managed the logistics of Merer's limestone deliveries. The system was coherent, the consequences were real. The warning was genuine. The pattern of what happened to those who did not heed it spans enough individuals and enough centuries to resist dismissal as coincidence, even when the specific mechanism cannot be identified. Consider the range of what has been documented. The early Arab explorers who forced entry into the Great Pyramid in the 9th century AD did not report dramatic misfortune, but the Caliph al-Mamun who authorized the forced entry is recorded in historical sources as having died within a year of the expedition under circumstances his contemporaries found suspicious. The European treasure hunters and antiquities collectors of the 18th and 19th centuries who flooded into Egypt following Napoleon's expedition and the subsequent craze for Egyptian material culture accumulated behind them, a trail of early deaths, deteriorating health, failed enterprises, and personal catastrophes whose frequency drew comment even from contemporaries who were not inclined towards supernatural explanation. Giovanni Belzoni, the most famous antiquities excavator of the early 19th century, who opened numerous tombs in the Valley of the Kings and removed enormous quantities of material to European museums, died in 1823 at the age of 45 in West Africa pursuing another expedition, his body consumed by dysentery on a journey that by his own account he had not wished to take but felt compelled to. His wife Sarah, who survived him, wrote in her memoirs about a persistent quality of darkness that followed their Egyptian years. She did not call it a curse. She did not have language for it that she trusted, but she noted it with the precision of a woman who had observed the world carefully and was recording what she saw. None of this constitutes proof. What it constitutes is testimony. Testimony from a sufficient number of individuals, across a sufficient span of time, in a sufficient variety of circumstances, to establish a pattern that sits at the edge of what the available frameworks can explain. The pattern does not require supernatural explanation. It requires only the acknowledgement that the ancient Egyptians understood something about the relationship between an object, its context, and the people who interact with it that has not been fully explained by the frameworks that came after them. The pyramid itself offers a version of this understanding in its most architectural form. The void above the Grand Gallery is 30 meters of intentional space, because nothing in the construction of the Great Pyramid is accidental. The architects who calibrated the King's Chamber's dimensions to produce a specific acoustic resonance, who oriented the shafts to specific stars, who designed the relieving chambers to distribute load across multiple redundant systems, who positioned the sarcophagus before the chamber was complete so it would be impossible to remove. These are not people who left 30 meters of unexpected space by accident. They designed it, they built it, they sealed it, and they said nothing in any document, in any inscription, in any papyrus record that has ever been found about what it contains or why it is there. That silence is a choice. In a culture that inscribed the names of bureaucrats and the schedules of limestone deliveries on papyrus, that carved the routes of the soul through the afterlife on the walls of burial chambers, that documented the trial of tomb robbers and the itemized contents of plundered graves, a culture that documented everything it valued, documenting a silence about a significant architectural feature of its most important structure is a decision. Someone decided that the void above the Grand Gallery was not to be described, that its contents, if it has contents, were not to be named, that the path to it was not to be recorded. The only people who knew were the ones who built it, and those people are stone. The scanning technology that found the void in the same muon tomography system that later found the new corridor below the north face is a development of early 21st century particle physics applied to archaeological problems. The Scan Pyramids project, which deployed it at Giza beginning in 2015, was a collaboration between Egyptian, French, and Japanese institutions, funded through a framework that placed Egyptian Archaeological Authority at the center of all decisions about access and publication. The void was announced in the journal Nature in 2017 with a measured, precise description of what the instruments had found and a careful statement about what could and could not be concluded from the data. What the instruments found was a large enclosed space. What could be concluded from the data was that the space exists and that its dimensions are approximately 30 meters in one direction. What could not be concluded was what it contains, whether it was designed as a functional space or a structural one, whether it has a connection to any other part of the pyramid's interior, or whether any object or material has ever been placed within it. The paper in Nature does not speculate about any of these questions. It presents what the instruments found and states what remains unknown. It is a document in the tradition of scientific publication, precise, bounded, methodologically honest, and conspicuously silent about the questions it cannot answer. The pyramid has always inspired that kind of document. The people who study it most carefully tend to speak most carefully. They have been educated by the structure in epistemic humility. They know that confident claims about the pyramid tend to require revision, and that the revision tends to come from the pyramid itself, rather than from new theoretical frameworks. The pyramid simply keeps producing evidence that the previous model did not account for. It has been doing this for as long as people have been studying it. It shows no sign of stopping. What the structure is, in the end, is not a mystery in the sense of a puzzle waiting to be solved. It is a mystery in the older sense of the word, the sense in which mystery refers to a sacred thing that has been intentionally structured to remain partially concealed. The ancient Egyptians had a concept for this. The inner sanctuaries of their temples, the holiest of holy spaces, where the statue of the god resided, and which only the highest priests were permitted to enter, were called the naos, the dark place, the hidden interior. Access was controlled not because the contents were secret in a trivial sense, but because the contents were sacred in a specific sense. They were meant to be approached only by those who understood what they were approaching, and why, and how. Access by the unprepared was not merely a practical problem, it was a theological one. The object of the sacred space was not served by exposure, it was served by protection. The concealment was the point. The void above the Grand Gallery may be the naos of the Great Pyramid, the space that was always meant to remain sealed, the space that the architects designed, built, finished, if it is finished. If the instruments would find prepared walls, the way the new corridor has prepared walls, and then locked away with no entry and no record and no key, designed to be found only by particles passing through stone in a technology that would not exist for 4,500 years, in a civilization whose relationship to the structure and the theology behind it would be one of archaeological study rather than ritual practice, the instruments found it. The stone accepted the muons and let the signal through. It did not offer anything else. The corridor below the north face has prepared walls and an undiscovered interior. The subterranean chamber has a roughly hewn ceiling and abandoned debris on the floor. The king's chamber has a humming granite sarcophagus that has been empty since the first person forced their way in. And above the grand gallery, in 30 meters of sealed space that no instrument has explained and no human has entered, the pyramid holds its last known secret. Last known because the instruments have not finished their work, and there may be others in the dark and the cold and the constant 20 degrees that the stone maintains without being asked. The stone knows what it holds. It has known for 4,500 years, and it has not told anyone yet. To understand why the pyramid exerts the hold it does on scholars, on treasure hunters, on tourists, on the builders of imitation pyramids in Nevada, on the people who fabricate photographs of unidentified figures in its corridors. It helps to sit with what the structure actually is in human terms, not what it was built for. What it is, as an object, as a presence on the earth. The Great Pyramid of Giza has been standing for longer than the gap between the first performance of a Shakespeare play and today. It was already 2,000 years old when the Roman Empire was at the height of its power, and Roman tourists came to Giza and scratched their names into the lower casing stones and stared up at it the way tourists still stare up at it, with the same vertiginous combination of admiration and incomprehension. It was already 3,000 years old when the medieval period began. It is 4,500 years old now. Its foundation stones were laid before the wheel was in common use, before iron was smelted, before the alphabet existed in any form. Every written language currently in use in the world was developed after the Great Pyramid was complete. This is the object that holds the void. This is the object that contains the empty sarcophagus. This is the object whose workers' names are gone, but whose every joint is still precise, whose ceiling slabs have not shifted, whose temperature is still 20 degrees, whose shafts still point at the stars they were aimed at when the stars were in different positions in the sky. It has outlasted every civilization that has tried to explain it. It has outlasted every theory about its purpose. It has outlasted the gods for whom it was built, the priests who maintained it, the culture that understood it, and the language in which it was designed. It will outlast the current attempts to scan it as well. The instruments will find what they find. The archaeologists will publish what they publish. The access protocols will eventually allow human entry into the new corridor and perhaps eventually into the void above the Grand Gallery, and whatever is found or not found will become part of the record. The record will be incomplete, as it has always been. The pyramid will hold whatever it continues to hold, silently, at 20 degrees, in the dark, on the plateau above the west bank of the Nile, for as long as the limestone and the granite can resist the forces that act on them, which, by current estimate, is a very long time. The people who removed objects from the burial contexts, the pyramid's builders so carefully constructed the tomb robbers of the New Kingdom, caught and prosecuted under Ramesses IX, the 19th century collectors who shipped Egyptian artifacts to European drawing rooms, the 20th century dealers who moved material through channels that bypassed Egyptian law, the private collectors who placed ushabtis in glass cases, far from the chambers they were built to inhabit, all of them encountered the same warning, inscribed in different forms across different surfaces at different points in Egyptian history, but always saying the same thing. The system is active. The component belongs in the system. What you are holding is not yours to hold. The warning was not always heeded. The record of what followed those who did not heed it is consistent enough, across enough individuals and enough centuries, to sit uncomfortably at the edge of the explainable, not proof of anything. Not confirmation of the ancient theology in any specific doctrinal sense, but a pattern, a recurring shape in the data that the available frameworks have not fully absorbed. The stone is patient with that. The stone is patient with everything. It has been patient with the tourists who climbed it in the 19th century, scratching their names in the lower blocks before the Egyptian government made climbing illegal. It has been patient with the treasure hunters and the colonizers and the archaeologists, and the particle physicists, and the journalists, and the documentary filmmakers, and the people who built imitation pyramids in Nevada, and the people who fabricated photographs of unidentified figures in its corridors. It has been patient with all of them, the way something 4,500 years old can afford to be patient because it knows, in whatever way stone knows things, that they will all pass and the stone will remain. The void above the Grand Gallery will still be there when everyone currently alive is gone. The new corridor below the north face will still have its prepared white limestone walls. The king's chamber will still hum. The sarcophagus will still be empty. The shafts will still be aimed at the stars, Thuban and Orion having continued their slow recession from their original positions over another century of the Earth's axial precession, but the shafts still pointing in the directions they were built to point, still functioning as the instruments of a calculation that was designed for a time frame no human institution has ever seriously attempted to plan for. That is what was built here, on the Giza Plateau, in approximately 2560 BC, by workers whose names are gone and a pharaoh whose body has never been found. Not merely a tomb, not merely a feat of engineering, a machine for the indefinite, a structure designed to continue functioning thermally, acoustically, astronomically, theologically, for as long as stone can hold against the forces that act on it, it is still functioning, and it is still holding something back. If you find yourself drawn to histories like this, to the places where the record stops and the stone begins, consider subscribing. There are many more such spaces, and many more that have yet to be fully understood.